What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. So I'm going to be going over 5 players that I think are getting a little bit overhyped ahead of drafts this season. These aren't necessarily players that I think are bad or I think are going to have bad seasons, but I think just the hype's gotten a little bit out of hand on these guys, and I think that's going to make it really difficult for them to meet their ADP expectations. This is a video I'm putting out shortly after a video going over 5 players that I think are being overlooked in drafts. So if you want to take a look at that, feel free to go do that. Think these are a good total list of 10 players that'll be really helpful for you guys to have in the back of your minds come draft day. So, yeah, we're putting out a video a day or lately so far. We got another tier list coming up tomorrow as well, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, let's just get into the first player here, and then I'll go over some recap after that. So the first player I think is being just a little overhyped this offseason is going to be Christian Watson. And don't get me wrong, Christian Watson really showed a lot of promise as a rookie last year. I think he's pretty clearly a talented player, but he's getting a really significant downgrade at the quarterback position, going from Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love. I suppose it's possible that Jordan Love can perform okay, and it's not as big of a downgrade as we're projecting. But until I see that, I have to assume that Jordan Love's going to be a significant downgrade from the future Hall of Famer. And even with Aaron Rodgers last season, he was really unable to generate a very consistent target share. He finished the season with only 41 catches. Just wasn't a very high volume guy. So in order for him to really pay off at his ADP, he's going to need to be extremely efficient, put up a lot of touchdowns. And I just don't know how many touchdowns there are going to be to go around in this Packers offense. I expect them to be a bottom half offense for sure. They're going to be really slow in terms of pace of play. They ranked dead last in the NFL last season in terms of pace of play, and I don't see any reason for them to really mix that up this season. They're going to try and win games with their defense and their 2 running backs. So you're going to really need him to put up a spike touchdown season, maybe average 17 yards per reception. That's just not something I could really see happening, or really something that I want to bet on. I have him ranked as my wide receiver 28 despite an ADP of wide receiver 21, and I worked really hard to bump him up in my rankings. I did everything I could to give him as high of a target share as I was comfortable with. I made him super efficient, giving him 16 yards per reception, and I think I gave him 8 touchdowns as well. And it just makes it just wasn't enough for him to actually stat out to be that wide receiver 21 that he's being drafted at. And I think I'm honestly being optimistic in my projections. I think it could be a lot worse for him. I think there is a world that exists where Romeo Doubs ends up being the #1 target in this offense in terms of total targets. I think Aaron Jones is going to be really involved as a pass catcher. I think this team's going to be a really run-heavy team as well with A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. So I just think it's going to be really tough for Christian Watson to pay off. I don't think there's much upside ahead of where he's being drafted just because there's just not going to be enough volume, not enough offense total in this Packers team to really go around. So I like Christian Watson, the talent, but I just don't really like his situation enough to think he can pay off at his ADP this year. So up next, I think another player that's being a little just overhyped this offseason, he's sort of a really popular breakout candidate you'll see around, is Jahan Dotson. And I actually think Jahan Dotson is an extremely talented player. He was the 18th pick in the NFL draft last season. That's earlier than any single wide receiver was drafted in the NFL this season. He looked really good last year. He was a really great touchdown scorer. He did miss 5 games with a hamstring injury that sort of hampered his rookie season, but he really showed that he's a really talented player, and there's no doubt in my mind that he's going to have a quality NFL career. But for me, just the big issue is the offense he's a part of. Despite the fact, or on top of the fact that he's already going to be on an offense that's probably again going to rank in the bottom half in the NFL. Honestly, bottom 10 is a pretty safe bet given where they've been the last several years. He's going to, in all likelihood, be the #2 wide receiver in this offense. Terry McLaurin's proven that he's a #1 in this league. He's a really talented player. I think that it'd be really shocking for me to see Jahan Dotson finish ahead of Terry McLaurin. And in each of the last 3 seasons, Terry McLaurin still hasn't been able to crack the top 20 at the position. He's finished as the wide receiver 22, 29, and 20 over the last 3 years. So it's just going to be really hard for Jahan Dotson to really break through that top 20 wide receiver ceiling. I just don't see the upside for Dotson, and a lot of people that are recommending him as a breakout or projecting him to finish as a solid wide receiver 2, they think he's got legitimate upside. I think he's going to have some really spike weeks because he's going to be a guy that can score touchdowns. But like I said, it's going to be a bad offense. They probably won't score too many touchdowns in general. And even if somehow he emerges as the #1 target in this offense, somehow he outperforms Terry McLaurin, which would surprise me because Terry McLaurin is just a really good player in the NFL. It still pretty much says that his ceiling is the top 20. His ceiling will be wide receiver 20. I don't see any world where he finishes ahead of that, and there's certainly a world where he finishes way below that, just because he's the #2 wide receiver in a really crappy offense. I currently have him projected as my wide receiver 46. His ADP is wide receiver 37, and I think they're just better players you can draft in that range, guys that are parts of better offenses and guys that actually have some more upside. I just don't see a world where Jahan Dotson's a real difference maker this year. Up next to go over a running back here, I've got Travis Etienne as another player who's being overhyped this season. He's currently being drafted as the running back 12, and to me, that just doesn't really make sense. He's got a really similar feel to me as Kenneth Walker in terms of the fact that he's a good player on a good offense that is a member of a team that just spent a day 2 draft pick on a running back. After the draft, we saw Kenneth Walker's ADP shift towards the downside dramatically. He went from being like the RB9 to now he's being drafted around the RB19. And Travis Etienne effectively moved down 1 or 2 spots after the Jaguars selected Tank Bigsby. Etienne's a really talented player, but he was actually really ineffective as a receiver last season. He was one of the worst goal line backs in the NFL in terms of his ability to convert goal line touches into touchdowns. And Bigsby is just a really talented pass catcher. He's a good pass protector, and he's a bigger body. Give it the name there. Um, Sorry, that was dumb. But regardless, he's going to be a player that I think has a legitimate shot to soak up that goal line work as well as some receiving work, and those are the valuable touches for running backs in the NFL. I think that Bigsby is a good enough player that it's going to be more of a timeshare than people are expecting. I would still expect Travis Etienne to finish ahead of Tank Bigsby, but Etienne played all 17 games last season, which you can't really ask for anything more than that given that he was coming off of a major injury. He averaged over 5 yards per carry. They cut James Robinson in the middle of the season, so he had no competition for touches really in this offense. We saw JaMychal Hasty even getting work, and Hasty's nowhere near as good as Tank Bigsby. And despite all of those things breaking right for Travis Etienne, he finished 23rd in fantasy points per game. That's about where I have him ranked. I have him ranked as my RB24 this season. I think that's about right. I think he's a low-end running back too. I think he's a really good player. He's going to be on a good offense, but he's going to miss out on just the touches that are super valuable for fantasy, and that's going to make it really hard for him to pay off his ADP. So I haven't really drafted Travis Etienne anywhere, and I really just wouldn't recommend you do that either. Up next, another player that I think is being overdrafted right now is George Kittle. George Kittle had a career high in receiving touchdowns last season. He scored 7 touchdowns over his final 4 games to put him at a season total of 11 touchdowns. And believe it or not, prior to last season, his career high in receiving touchdowns over the course of an entire season was 6, and he had 7 touchdowns in a 4-game stretch. So I think it's pretty safe to say that that's just not going to be a sustainable source of fantasy points for him. Maybe he and Brock Purdy have a bit of a better connection. Maybe he get closer to that 7 or 8 touchdown mark. I'm currently projecting him for 6 this season. But the real issue here is that Kittle is just, in all likelihood, going to be the number 4 target in an offense that's going to be a really run-heavy team as well. I think that Debo, Ayuk, and Christian McCaffrey are all likely to beat Kittle in terms of target share this season. And that makes it so that the only real way that George Kittle pays off as his ADP is if he just manages to put up a really fluky touchdown season again. I don't really want to bet on that if I'm drafting a tight end to be a difference maker for me. I want him to be able to be a week in and week out reliable guy with or without a touchdown. And I want those breakout and really week winning weeks to happen in games where he has 1 or 2 touchdowns, but I don't want those bust weeks when he doesn't. I think George Kittle is going to be a guy that's going to have a lot of frustrating games, a guy that'll probably have a lot of games where he catches 2 or 3 passes for 30 yards, and then that's all you get if he doesn't get a touchdown. He's just not necessary enough to this offense to be a consistent fantasy contributor. Obviously, if something were to happen to Debo, McCaffrey, or Ayuk, I think that would change. You'd see Kittle be more involved in the offense. There's some upside there, but when you're drafting a guy to be a difference maker like that, I don't think you want to be betting on an injury for him to really pay off at his ADP. I've currently got him as my tight end 6 in my rankings. He's being drafted as the tight end 4, and I just think that there's a pretty big difference between him and the top tiers of tight ends, so I just don't find myself drafting him at all. I don't think he's got any real shot of finishing inside that top 3. And last but not least here, another player that I think is being overhyped a little bit is DeAndre Hopkins. I think that a lot of people were just really hoping he'd end up on a better situation. People haven't really come to terms with the fact that his landing spot in Tennessee just isn't going to be all that great for him in fantasy. He's a wide receiver over the age of 31 switching teams. That's historically already putting him up against it in terms of his odds of succeeding. It's very rare for 31-year-old wide receivers to have quality seasons in the NFL. And now he's moving to an offense that's going to have some of the lowest passing volume, or have near the lowest passing volume in the entire league. I'm currently projecting DeAndre Hopkins to lead the team in target share and touchdown share at the receiving position. I'm giving him a really healthy 26% target share, along with 30% of the receiving touchdowns in this offense. And there just isn't much to go around. A 26% target share on a team that's going to throw the ball less than 500 times, probably have less than 25 passing touchdowns. It just doesn't really check out for him to be really great. Even if he can stay healthy all year, which we know is by no means a guarantee. He's struggled with injury the last couple of years. He's only getting older. So there's certainly injury risk as well. And even if he holds off, Treylon Burks is the number one wide receiver on this roster, which I'm honestly really high on Treylon Burks. I still am projecting Hopkins to be the number one in this offense, but I wouldn't be at all shocked if by the end of the season we see Burks really emerging as the number one here. Burks is the player that's ascending in his career, and DeAndre Hopkins is certainly on the way down. And like I said, even if those two things hold true, Hopkins stays healthy and he's the number one target in this offense, he still stats out as a wide receiver 36 in my rankings, 15 spots behind his ADP of the wide receiver 21. I think in all likelihood you're drafting an injury-prone, volatile wide receiver 3 if you draft DeAndre Hopkins, and you're really drafting him at an ADP where he needs to be a consistent wide receiver 2 for you. So I just don't see the upside for Hopkins. He's just not in the potent enough offense to pay off his ADP, and I would just avoid him in drafts this year. So that'll do it for my 5 overhyped players this offseason. I think that I think most of you guys will probably agree with them, but we'll see what you guys have to say. If you guys disagree with any of these players or have any other players you think are getting overdrafted, feel free to let me know in the comments. I love interacting with you guys. We can see if there's any sort of consensus or disagreement there. It's fun to sort of hash that out and see who can really see if we can come to a consensus there. If this is your first time on the channel, I want to thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate all the support. If you would like more content like this, which there will be more of, I put out a video pretty much every single day, and I will continue to do that throughout the course of this off season. Please do subscribe to the channel. You can click the notification bell so you get more notifications when videos come out. If you liked the video, which I hope you did because you made it this far, please do give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. It really helps me know I'm doing a good job as well. So up next, tomorrow, you'll be getting my wide receiver tier list. I'll go over the top 24 wide receivers. And then after that, I'll be doing a bit of an auction draft strategy video again, and then I'll touch on my tight end tier list as well. So yeah, with that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.